जयति जयति जय जय मामीरा, जय जय श्री अरविन्द। जयति जयति जय जय मामीरा, जय जय श्री अरविन्द। जय जय श्री अरविन्द, जय जय श्री अरविन्द। जयति जयति जय जय मामीरा, जय जय श्री अरविन्द। दशो दिशा से चुपके स्वर तेरा गुंजार करे। सोम कलश उमड़े छल के हृदय में आकर श्रृंगार करे। प्रेम सुधा के प्यासे हैं हम, बालक वृद्ध जन वृंद। जयति जयति जय जय मामीरा, जय जय श्री अरविन्द। हे विश्वंभर हे चिरसुंदर, जीवन में झंकार भरो। पल प्रतिपल में आलोकित कर, मधुर भक्ति संचार करो। अंतर बाहर के प्रिय मामा, निखिल शक्ति आनंद। जयति जयति जय जय मामीरा, जय जय श्री अरविन्द। विमल सौम्य तुम हे तेजोमय, दिव्य प्रभामय लोक विहारी। दिग दिगंत से जग अनंत से, सत्तानत हो तुम में सारी। पिया अरविंद पराग विमल हम, उड़े विभोर मिलिंद। जयति जयति जय जय मामीरा, जय जय श्री अरविन्द। अमल कमल तुम प्रेम पयोनिधि, पुरुषोत्तम अनुपम अवतार। हे विराट प्रभु जगन्नियंता, करुणा कर आए साकार। प्रणमन करते चरणों में हम, मिलकर सब शिशु वृंद। जयति जयति जय जय मामीरा, जय जय श्री अरविन्द। जय जय श्री अरविन्द, जय जय श्री अरविन्द। जयति जयति जय जय मामीरा, जय जय श्री अरविन्द। जय जय श्री अरविन्द, जय जय श्री अरविन्द।
Namaste, my dear sisters and brothers. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. This devotional song in the melodious voice of Mithupal, Jayati Jayati Jai Shri Ma, Jai Jai Shri Aravinda, is the devotee paying his respect by saying victory to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo. And the devotee can see the Guru, the Gurus, the two who are one, everywhere, all around, and in every nook and corner of the body. So it is this total immersive experience in the Guru that has been emphasized in this devotional song. With that, we now turn to today's topic, the male reproductive system. Man is more than a feeding and breeding animal, and therefore, although sex is one of those instincts with which we are heavily overloaded, in order to accommodate the unique aspirations of man, there is quite a bit of mystique as well as considerations, legal, social, moral, ethical, religious, and spiritual, that have been attached to it. And that has been possible in biological terms because of a great degree of encephalization of the human being. That is, our brain is much more complex, much better developed, and particularly the thinking part of the brain, the cerebral cortex, is enormously bigger, uh, both in absolute terms and in relation to our body size, as compared to most animals. And that has given us the unique urges, the unique aspirations to know the divine, to serve the divine, uh, and has pushed some of these basic instincts to the background and given us the need for a great deal of regulation of these basic activities, which remain essential, but at the same time do not are not expected to uh, with preoccupy us the way they do in animals. So that little introduction. Now we turn to the male reproductive system. The Yes course and all other Yes activities are a part of the celebrations of the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo and the 75th anniversary of India's independence. Before we turn to the male reproductive system itself, let's look at the process of reproduction uh, as a whole. We have a large variety of cells in the body, and these are all different in their appearance. And some of these now you have become familiar with and have been shown in this picture. Uh, some of them have all these processes which increase the surface area, and some of them are flattened like this so that there's hardly anything except the nucleus, only a bit of cytoplasm, so that the thinness of these cells would allow transport across the linings which the of which the which constitute linings which are constituted by these thin cells, as in the case of capillaries. And we shall see some more cells of this type, which are muscle cells and nerve cells. And now all these cells look different, and yet they are the same because each cell has a nucleus, and that nucleus has the genetic blueprint, which is exactly the same in each of these cells. So if the genetic blueprint, which is supposed to control the way a cell looks and behaves, if that is the same, then why is it that these cells are so different in their appearance as well as in the way they function? That is because although the genetic material is the same, the part of that genetic material which is expressed is different in each cell. Much of it remains repressed, that is hidden. It just remains a potentiality, but is not actually expressed. A small bit is expressed, and the part that is expressed is different in each of these cells. And that is how these cells to come to have a different type of appearance as well as the way they function. Now let's look at this genetic blueprint a little more in detail. Uh, Although most of the time the nucleus looks like a jumble of, in the nucleus we can see this jumbled up mass which stains deep blue or purple with the common stains. Uh, there are certain stages in the cell cycle when this material sorts itself out into more manageable uh, entities. And these entities is what we call chromosomes. So these chromosomes are thread like structures and they come in pairs. So we have in each cell 22 pairs plus another, the 23rd pair. So in all, every human cell has 46 chromosomes or 23 pairs of chromosomes. And out of all these pairs, out of the pairs that we have, the 23 pairs, one came from the mother and one came from the father. And that's how we tend to have characteristics, some characteristics resembling more the mother and some more the father. And in turn, our mother and father got it from their parents, and some of it continues to may get expressed in the grandchild rather than in the parents. Uh, Now, that is how sort of we have this continuity, which is ensured by these chromosomes. At the same time, diversity, because the chromosomes are half of the chromosomes are coming from the mother and half from the father. Now, each of these chromosomes uh, encodes different characteristics, and each of these chromosomes encodes different characteristics, and but at the same time, so far as the characters encoded by each member of the pair is concerned, they are exactly the same. Now, one came from the father and one from the mother. Now, which is the character that will actually get expressed? In general, we can say that one of these characteristics, that is, one which came from either the father or the mother, tends to be dominant. And it's the dominant character that gets expressed. And the other one, which is called recessive, that is the submissive or the silent one, which does not get expressed. Now, which is the character that is likely to be dominant? Again, nature has arranged this beautifully. Out of the two, the one which is likely to have better survival value, the one which is likely to give us a better health, that is the one that gets expressed, and the one which is which will lead to characteristics which are less healthy, which encodes for less healthy characters, that will remain repressed. And but in some cases, there is no clear dominance, and what we end up expressing is something between the two, intermediate between the two. So this is the way, I mean, we have these 22 pairs, but then the 23rd pair is a little different in men and women. In case of women, the 23rd pair is also similar to these, and these two chromosomes are called XX, that is, each of these is an X chromosome. But in men, there's only one X chromosome, and the other member of the pair is a much smaller one, and that is called the Y chromosome. So that is how these cells of a man and a woman differ. The 22 pairs are comparable in both men and women, but the 23rd pair is different. In case of women, it consists of two X chromosomes. In a man, one X and one Y chromosome. Now, cell division is something which is seen in all the cells because the cells are dying and they get replaced by uh, the remaining cells or precursor cells as a result of division. And this division is such that we get exactly the same type of daughter cells as compared to the cells which have died or which have to be replaced. So they have exactly the same number of chromosomes, the same type of chromosomes. It's an exact duplicate and the same characteristics in appearance and behavior. And that is how we don't even come to know that this process is going on because we tend to have the same number of cells, the same type of cells all the time. So those which are dying are just getting replaced, and you don't even come to know. It's something like, uh, the car in which something or the other may keep going wrong, and with the part which becomes unserviceable, we replace it with a new part, and the result is that over a period of 15 or 20 years, uh, almost all these parts of the car might have been changed for new ones, but still the car looks essentially the same. Uh, and that's how we look essentially the same, but uh, our cells are getting replaced, and we don't have the same cells continuing, except in a few organs where uh, the cells do not get replaced and the same cells continue to serve us throughout life. But by and large, this type of a turnover of cells is going on all the time, and the cells which are dying are getting replaced by exactly the same type of cells, same number of chromosomes, exactly the same type of chromosomes, same appearance, same function. However, in gonads, that is the sex organs, there are some cells in gonads. In gonads also we have this type of cells too, but there are some cells in gonads which behave differently. These cells start in the same way with 46 chromosomes, but they go through a special process of division which gives us two daughter cells in which only one member of each pair is present, and so these have 23 chromosomes each. And these cells, which have 23 chromosomes each, are called the gametes. The male gamete is the sperm, and the female gamete is the egg or the ovum. Now, it's easy to understand that the gonadal cells which give rise to gametes, in case of women, the gonad is the ovary. The ovary starts with certain cells which have, like any other cells in the body, 22 pairs of chromosomes plus another 23rd pair XX. Now, if this divides into two in such a way that we have only one member of each pair present in the daughter cell, then uh, naturally we'll have two daughter cells, each with 22 plus X and 22 plus X. And this process is again sort of random in the sense that within these 22 also, some might have come from this woman's father and some from the mother. And the same would apply to this, which means there's a thorough reshuffling of the cards going on. And further, when this will combine with the male gamete, there'll be a further sort of a variation introduced. And that's how this is a sort of a reshuffling going on all the time, which gives us diversity as well as ensures better quality for the progeny by and large. Because the best ones will tend to get selected. Uh, as we saw, the recessive characters are generally not as good as the dominant character. So a woman produces two types of eggs, both similar, 22 plus X, 22 plus X. But within these 22, the two may not be exactly alike because some might have come from the father and some from the mother in this, and the same would be true of this. And the one which came from the father in this cell, corresponding to that, the chromosome in this would have come from the mother of the woman. So there will be, so that is the only difference, but otherwise, these are very similar eggs or gametes that the woman produces, 22 plus X. In case of men, however, we saw that we have 22 pairs of chromosomes, 22 pairs of ordinary chromosomes, plus XY, the sex chromosomes, as they are called. And therefore, the gametes or the sperms that are produced will be of two different types. So, from one precursor cell, one cell to start with, which gives us these sperms, one will get the X out of this, and another sperm will get Y from this pair. So we have two types of sperms produced in equal number, one with the X chromosome and another with the Y chromosome. Now let's look at what happens when one egg unites with one sperm. So one egg or ovum, when it unites with one sperm, there are these four combinations possible. Let's start with two eggs to start with. Uh, one precursor cell will give us two daughter cells, two eggs, and the same, let's start with one precursor cell of the sperms, which will give us these two sperms when it has gone through the type of division, which gives us only half the number of chromosomes, that is 23. Now, if this combines with this, we'll get 44 chromosomes plus XX. If, however, it combines with this type of a sperm, we'll get 44 plus XY, and this will then give us a boy. Uh, the same way, this egg, when it combines with this, will give us 44 plus XX, a girl, and this one, 44 plus YY, a boy. And that's how, since the process is a random process, and these two types of sperms are produced in equal numbers, there is uh, an equal probability of a child being a girl or a boy. Whether the baby will be a boy or a girl, therefore, we can see, depends on the contribution that the man makes to the process. It is the man who is uh, producing these two different types of sperms, and that is what is deciding whether the child will be a girl or a boy. So, whether the baby will be a boy or a girl depends on the contribution that the man makes to the process. And therefore, if somebody is particularly interested in getting a boy or a girl, don't blame the woman for it. It is the man's contribution that determines whether the child will be a boy or a girl. Now, let's look at the male reproductive system. Uh, this is the gonad, the testis, and this leads to a set of tubular structures which then convey the products of this testis, that is the sperms, through this tube. And when it is about to reach the end, we have these two glands, the seminal vesicles and the prostate, which add their secretions to what comes from the testes. And then uh, you can see that it continues and joins the urethra. Now, this is the urinary bladder, and this is the urethra. So at this point, uh, surrounded by the prostate, is the place where this duct, which is a tube, which is bringing the products from the testis, joins the urethra, which is coming from the urinary bladder. After that, the passage for the for the urine and the semen, that is the uh, becomes common. And this is a little clearer picture, although highly diagrammatic. And here you can see it more clearly. The testis and the products of this accumulate into a coiled tube, the epididymis, and from there it continues into this tube called the vas deferens. And then towards the end, we have the seminal vesicle, which can pour its secretions into the vas deferens, and the prostate, which can also pour its secretions into this. And surrounded, while it is surrounded by the prostate, it joins the urethra, which is coming from the urinary bladder, and then this common passage for both. This is another view, the urinary bladder, and these are the ureters entering the urinary bladder. And this is the duct coming from the testes. And here you can see the seminal vesicles and the prostate, and this would open into the urethra. Yeah. Now, within the testis, we have a set of structures which are called seminiferous tubules. Tubules which are because they are tube-like. Seminiferous because they give us products which ultimately become the semen, and seminy generally refers to something which can proliferate, like seminal production of something. So here, because they produce these sperms in large numbers, and their purpose also is eventually reproduction. So seminiferous tubules. So here are the seminiferous tubules, and as you can see, these are circular structures. But then, if you place large number of circular structures together, in between you'll be left with these spaces. These spaces are filled with Leydig cells, or these spaces have Leydig cells or interstitial cells. Interstitial because what lies somewhere in some space in between, like this, surrounding the something. So that is generally referred to as interstitial. So these are interstitial cells or Leydig cells, and these are the seminiferous tubules where the sperms are produced. Now this gives you a little bigger view of the same. Uh, these are the Leydig cells in the interstitial space. This is a blood vessel in that interstitial space, and within the tubule, you can see that you have these cells, which are the precursors of the sperms. As you go deep towards the cavity of the tubule, they keep maturing, and then here you have sperms which actually look like sperms, although they are still not fully mature, but they have started having the appearance of a sperm. But then you find that there are these big cells in which these precursors, that is, these cells which are developing into sperms, seem to be nestled. And these cells have processes. Now, these cells are called Sertoli cells. And for a long time, we didn't know much about what they do. And it was thought that just providing some sort of a mechanical support to these cells. But now we know that, in fact, they are very important and uh, extremely important. One can call them, instead of Sertoli cells, supervisory cells. They're supervising this entire process of the precursor cells finally developing into the sperms, and making sure that before they get a send off from here, they are well equipped as well as reasonably disciplined. So the Sertoli cells are in fact extremely important, and we shall see a little more about them a little later. So you can see that in this seminiferous tubule, we have three types of cells. One, these cells which form the sperms, these cells which form the sperms, and here are the sperms. So you start with the most primitive cells here, and they keep maturing, and you have the cells here. Those which produce testosterone, the hormone, they are the Leydig cells or the interstitial cells here. And the third category are the Sertoli cells here. So we have these three types of cells, and we shall have a little closer look at these one by one. These cells, one can understand, yes, they are forming the sperms. How about the Sertoli cells? And these cells are producing testosterone. The Sertoli cells is what we know a lot more about now than we did earlier. They may be providing some mechanical support, but probably that is the least important part of their role. One of the functions is that they provide nourishment to these developing sperms. They take care of their nutrition because there is no blood vessel that enters this area. Blood vessels do not enter this area because blood could bring something which is toxic, which does not allow this process to happen properly. And we want to provide, nature has arranged for the cleanest possible environment for the development of these sperms so that their quality is not adversely affected by the type of environment into which they are exposed. So although the blood environment provides an environment which is fairly well regulated, but still that regulation, that good environment which the blood provides to all cells of the body, may not be good enough for these cells which receive special protection. So this seems to be an arrangement for special protection, and that is ensured by nourishment coming from the Sertoli cells, which are getting nourished by the blood, but then they would make sure that they are able to pass on only the best environment to these developing cells. So they are sort of the supervisory cells, the nurturing cells for these cells which are developing into sperms. And it is these cells which then also constitute the blood testis barrier. That is the barrier which does not allow blood to affect these cells. And how is that barrier ensured? Because these processes which are coming from here, uh, in fact, are so long that they come in contact with each other. And the junction between the processes of the Sertoli cells is so tight that it does not let blood or anything that is oozing out of the blood influence these cells. So there's a blood testis barrier, which also is constituted by these Sertoli cells. Then the Sertoli cells also manufacture a protein, the androgen binding protein. What it does is that it concentrates testosterone. The testosterone that is produced by these Leydig cells or the interstitial cells, all of it does not enter the bloodstream. In general, hormones enter the bloodstream, they're not conveyed by a duct. But here, some of the testosterone enters the bloodstream, and that leads to the generalized functions like these, like the development of secondary sex characters at puberty, or the libido, the thoughts and influence on thoughts and feelings of a person. All that is because of this some testosterone getting into the blood like any other hormone. But some of this testosterone just diffuses locally into this area, and that will ensure a higher concentration than would be available from the blood. And since testosterone is required for these sperm precursors to develop into sperms, it's an arrangement which is quite understandable, that serving a useful purpose, providing a higher concentration than would be available in the blood. But then the concentration is further increased by the androgen binding protein, which is manufactured by the Sertoli cells. Androgen binding protein, as the name suggests, binds the androgens. Androgen, testosterone is the androgen. Andro, refers to the male, so one which gives rise to male characteristics. So androgen. So androgen binding protein. So it binds testosterone. By binding testosterone, not leaving it free, it further ensures that a higher concentration of testosterone is built up. But then it doesn't just help in developing more and more sperms by creating a higher concentration of testosterone. The production of sperms is also well regulated. It is regulated by negative feedback. Uh, Testosterone is subject to that negative feedback. We shall see a little more of it again. But then there is also a negative feedback exerted through inhibin. Inhibin, as the name suggests, actually um, inhibits the formation of sperms. So this is a sort of a cell that loves the cells which it is nurturing, but same time loves them with discipline. So love and discipline should go together for the children, and that is what the Sertoli cell seems to be doing. It's seeming to be playing a parental role for the developing sperms. And we'll not talk too much about inhibin, because we can understand the regulation and the feedback even without talking much about inhibin. But inhibin is an important hormone, which again exerts a negative feedback effect on the formation of these sperms. And finally, when the sperms have reached a level of development and parenting and schooling, whatever you may call it, after they have reached that level, then the Sertoli cells also secrete a fluid which can push them off, which can send them away. Of course, there are cells which have small cells, you see, which have been shown here, which have the characteristics of tiny muscles, which lead to a contraction of the say these tubules, but then along with the contraction, it would be also necessary to have some fluid to carry them. And that fluid also comes from the Sertoli cells. So the Sertoli cells take care of these uh, in many ways and ensure that the right number, neither too many nor too few, of these sperms continue to be produced, and they get enough of testosterone by concentrating, and yet not too much of it by producing inhibin. And then finally, when these are ready, they give them a send off. They don't cling to these children, they give them a send off for embarking on a long journey. Long because all the coiled tubes and that we saw, and the way the sperms will now travel is itself a pretty long and tortuous journey. So the regulation of the function of the gonads or the testis is through negative feedback, and the product, we'll talk about only one product, testosterone produced by the Leydig cells or the interstitial cells. This feeds back primarily to the hypothalamus, to some extent also to the anterior pituitary, and the hypothalamus produces the releasing hormone, the gonadotropin releasing hormone, and the hypothalamus itself is affected by melatonin, which is affected by stress, as we saw, and hypothalamus is affected by the thinking and the feeling part of the brain, and therefore uh, the hypothalamus is affected both by melatonin, which in turn is affected by stress and the duration of sleep, etc. So, all these things, duration of sleep, quality of sleep, stress, thoughts, and feelings through the hypothalamus will be able to affect reproductive function in the male as well. And the anterior pituitary in the male, as in the female, produces again both these hormones. LH, which in this case is called the interstitial cell stimulating hormone, because it stimulates the interstitial cells which produce testosterone. And the second hormone, that is FSH, which in the women stimulates the follicles. Corresponding to that are the seminiferous tubules here, uh, which manufacture the sperms. So, corresponding to the two types of cells, that is the sperm producing cells and the testosterone producing cells, we have these two hormones coming from the anterior pituitary. FSH stimulating the formation of sperms, and LH or ICSH stimulating the synthesis of testosterone. And both are subject to negative feedback. The production of testosterone primarily via this negative feedback to the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary, and FSH through the negative feedback produced by the Sertoli cells, the inhibin, which also has this negative feedback. So we have negative feedback on both sides, uh, affecting the cells which manufacture the sperms as well as cells which manufacture testosterone. So two types of cells, corresponding to that, two types of hormones from the anterior pituitary, but a single hormone from the hypothalamus regulating both. So that is the type of arrangement we have. So it's a fairly well regulated production of sperms and testosterone. Now the product, the sperms as they are produced by the testis. It is about 70 microns long, of which the head is just about 5 microns long. So much of it is the neck and the tail. The head essentially consists of the nucleus, which carries the genetic material. But at the tip, it has the acrosome, which sort of uh, ensures the penetration. It has the equipment for making its passage through the female genital tract. So this is the sort of the like a spear, like an arrow, which can penetrate. But it's not just because of its arrow-like shape; it's because it has those chemicals which can dissolve and create a passage, dissolve the fluid on the way and create a passage. So that is what the acrosome is about. Acro, means extreme. So it's at the extreme of end. So that's why the acrosome. So this is the head. What about the neck? The neck has a very large number of mitochondria. Mitochondria are the powerhouse of a cell. That's where the energy is generated. And this does require a lot of energy to swim through the female genital tract. So all the energy that is needed for the lashing of this tail so that this little cell can swim is provided by these mitochondria. So a small little head and a long tail to be able to swim. Is sometimes asked, which is longer, the rat or its tail? And very often the answer we get it is the tail. And when a person says that the tail is longer than the rat, one forgets that the rat includes its tail. So the tail can never be longer than the rat, although it may seem so. And that applies to this also. Which is longer, the tail of the sperm or the sperm? The sperm includes the tail. So naturally, the sperm is longer, but then the tail is really long. Now, in one ejaculate, uh, the, the volume is about 3 to 5 ml, and each ml or milliliter has 100 million sperms. So 4 to 500 million sperms in each ejaculate. But then the important thing is for a person to be fertile, at least 80% of these should be normal. Normal in their structure, in their appearance. And the count should also be more than 40 million sperms per milliliter. So 100, is uh, sort of the average. In all these things, we don't have anything fixed which is normal. There's a range of normals. But then if it is less than 40 million per milliliter, usually the person is not fertile. And the trend these days is for more of these abnormal cells as well as a lower sperm count. What the reasons are, whether it is uh, nutrition or whether it is radiation in the environment or whether it is stress, all these things perhaps could be contributing, but the trend is towards reduced fertility. Now, the sperms, as they are released from the testis, are not really fully ready. They just received some elementary education in the testis from the Sertoli cells, but they need further education in various schools and colleges, and that is what happens in the subsequent passage of these sperms before they are finally released. They acquire their motility and the ability to fertilize in the epididymis in 10 to 14 days. So this coiled tube, the epididymis, is where they may stay for a month or more. But out of that, about 2 weeks are required, in fact, for acquiring motility. Acquiring motility only means developing the capacity to swim. They still actually don't swim. And in fact, they do not swim till they have entered the female genital tract. Till then, they do not swim. We just keep improving their ability to swim. They keep acquiring this ability, which means they keep getting education, but they remain essentially unemployed. And they become employable, gradually more eligible for employment as they go through all these areas, but they actually uh, start doing their job only when they're employed, and their employment means entering the female genital tract, and that is where they actually start swimming. So they acquire this ability to move and the ability to fertilize in about 2 weeks, and they may stay there for a month or more. But eventually, if not called on to travel any further, they may degenerate, and the epididymis can take care of the debris. It absorbs the degenerating sperms back. Now, from the epididymis, now, if the journey continues further, they move into the vas deferens. And this is a long tube, as you can see, and they may stay here for months. It has a large storage capacity again, and for months they may be there without moving. uh, but when called for, it can propel the sperms and push them further. And if not called upon, then the vas deferens would just absorb them back like the epididymis, as the epididymis did. Now, the seminal vesicles. The seminal vesicles and prostate come into play only if the semen is called forth and actually goes out. It's only then that the seminal vesicles and the prostate become useful and they start functioning. And in fact, the seminal vesicles are important in many ways, but one of the most striking and visible ways they contribute is that they contribute 60% to the volume of the semen. And this again is understandable because uh, although there is plenty of storage space in the epididymis and the vas deferens, that space is used for having as many spermatozoa, as many sperms as possible, packing them tightly. But when they have to go out, they need a larger amount of fluid to be pushed into the female genital tract. And therefore, that arrangement comes only towards the end of this in the seminal vesicles and the prostate, seminal vesicles contributing about 60% to the volume of the semen. And further, what this seminal fluid from the seminal vesicles does is to protect the sperms against the acidic environment of the female genital tract and against germs which may be present there. It also has some nourishment for these cells, fructose, vitamin C, etc. And it also has fibrinogen, which is the same type of protein which we have in the blood and leads to the formation of the blood clot. The semen also clots inside the female genital tract, and therefore uh, the arrangement has been made for providing fibrinogen from the seminal vesicles and enzymes which will lead to the clotting from the prostate. So seminal vesicles provide the fibrinogen, prostate provides the clotting enzyme. And then this large volume also ensures that the semen uh, will be washed off this and much of it will enter the female genital tract rather than remain in the passages. So with that push, with 60% of the volume uh, being contributed from here, the seminal vesicles are also contributing to washing off the semen uh, to this subsequent passage. How about the prostate, which everybody has heard of because of the enlarged prostate in the elderly men? Prostate contributes 25% to the volume. So 60% from the seminal vesicles, 25% from here, hardly 10 to 15% from the whatever was coming from the testes. And the prostate also adds to the nourishment. Part of the nourishment came from the Sertoli cells here. It also comes in the epididymis and the vas deferens. But then the sperms get a send off from all these places. All these schools and colleges during the farewell provide them some more food to carry along the journey. So there's some nourishment, then enzymes for clotting and for dissolution of the clot. We'll come to this again, why this clot is necessary in the female genital tract and why then, of course, it needs to be dissolved. It needs to be dissolved to release the spermatozoa for further onward journey. Then the alkaline prostate fluid is alkaline in nature, which neutralizes the acidic environment of the female genital tract. And one very important thing that the prostatic fluid does is that during ejaculation, it closes the opening between the bladder and the urethra. This opening here between the bladder and the urethra, this gets closed so that the semen will not try to go up to the bladder. Even more important, the urine will not flow down during ejaculation. So a person does not pass urine simultaneously, although the passage is common. During ejaculation, there's no passage of urine. So this is closed off. This is closed off by the prostatic fluid so that without any contamination by the urine, the semen will pass through the tract. Now, how does the semen actually get to its destination, biological destination, that is the female genital tract? This starts with the sex act, which consists of arousal, which is the result of, which can be the result of a touch as well as the psychological influences, usually a combination of both. And this leads to initially the erection of the penis. And this is a process that is brought about by the activation of the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. We shall talk about that in a few days. But parasympathetic is that division which becomes active during rest and relaxation. So, this is a process that can take place only in a peaceful environment when a person is at rest and relaxed. But then, if the process has to continue further and everything is appropriate for continuing the act further, then the next thing is emission and ejaculation. That is emission, that is squeezing out of the semen uh, into subsequent passages, and finally its ejaculation out of the tract into the female tract, and these are both carried out by the sympathetic nervous system. Now, why this division of two different divisions of the nervous system? One can easily understand because every arousal and erection does not necessarily have to lead to emission and ejaculation. And also, since this is brought about by the sympathetic, the man is more excited at this point. And also, uh, it means that after that excitement, the ejaculation uh, takes place, and all this is over in about 19 seconds. Why somebody has emphasized 19 seconds? Perhaps to emphasize that's only a short, lasting, fleeting pleasure. Like all sensory pleasures, it lasts only 19 seconds. And after that, the man is feels exhausted because of this sympathetic overdrive and tends to fall asleep. And the sympathetic overdrive is also responsible sometimes for a person may get a heart attack if the person is susceptible to it. And that's why those who have heart disease are advised not to indulge in sex uh, unless they are sure about it. So, because this sympathetic overdrive uh, is generalized in nature, release of adrenaline can impose additional burden on the heart. Now, let's look at the journey of the male gamete or the sperm after it has been ejaculated. The journey from the point from where it leaves up to the egg is a 12 centimeter journey. And looking at the size of the 12 centimeter is not long, but then looking at the size of the sperm, which is only 70 microns, 1 micron is only 1,000th of a millimeter. For this size, it is equivalent to a man or a woman swimming 5 miles upstream. And therefore, it's not surprising that out of 500 million, only a few hundred reach near the egg. And out of all these 500, only one actually penetrates the egg. Between the point where it is near the egg and the egg itself, again, there are a few layers to cross because the egg is surrounded by uh, some cells, the granulosa cells. And after that, there's again a layer of which they have to cross, zona pellucida, before it gets into the egg. So there are barriers to cross. And there is a reduction in the number that is able to successfully get in at each point. Only a few hundred will reach near the egg, and at the final point when penetration could be possible, only 20 or 30 are probably left. And out of these 20 or 30, one actually penetrates the egg. And after one has penetrated, the door is shut, and another sperm cannot enter the same egg. All this selection that is taking place at several stages, as you can see, uh, is probably not just a random process. It could be related to the quality of the sperms, which means it is the fittest and the strongest, and therefore the one which is likely to give the best child that actually makes it to the egg. Now, what happens in the female genital tract after the sperms have been deposited there? After entering the female genital tract, the semen gets clotted, and in that are trapped the sperms. So it is here that the clotting takes place, for which there was fibrinogen in the seminal vesicles and the clotting enzymes in the prostatic fluid. And while they are trapped, they get exposed to the female genital tract environment. And this environment completes the process by which the capacity to swim can actually translate into action. Till now, it was only an ability that has been imparted, but it is in this during the stay in the female genital tract that the possibility of actually translating this ability into action is acquired. And you can say that now that the job has been given, uh, the final training takes place here in the female genital tract by which they can actually swim. And when that is over, then the clot dissolves, and then they are able to swim. Some swim faster than the others, and that is why out of several millions, it is only a few hundred which will get near the egg. Now, this capacitation, that is acquiring the capacity to fertilize an egg by swimming, needs at least 1 hour, but generally takes longer. And the estimates vary, but it could be anything from 12 to 24 hours before the sperms actually start swimming towards the egg. So now you can see that while I mean so much work had been done in the male genital tract before the semen is deposited, it finally takes some contribution by the woman to give them the capacity to swim, to give them the capacity to penetrate, and then only they are able to do it. And therefore, the female contribution is not just the egg, but also uh, making the making fertilization possible by imparting to the sperms in the semen the actual final capacity to swim, translate this potential, this latent ability into action, and to be able to penetrate the eggs. So that contribution of the woman is important. Uh, Once a class, an English language class, was given this sentence to punctuate. You know, you often get these sentences without any punctuation and without any capitals, and then the student is expected to uh, punctuate it. And the idea is to show the students not only how to punctuate a sentence, but also the importance of punctuation, because punctuation can bring out the meaning, whereas without punctuation, the sentence may not make much of sense. So the line given as woman without her man is incomplete. Now, most of the students in the class punctuated it like this: woman without her man is incomplete. Now, the girls in the class were naturally not very happy completing it like this. But then, if you had to get marks for this question, this was the only way they thought they could complete it. And so they did it like this. But there was one smart girl in the class, and this is what she did: woman, without her, man is incomplete. So now, this is the journey that the sperms have to make from point A to point B. And it is this 12 centimeter long journey, which is equivalent to a 5-mile swim upstream. There are a few lines from Savitri, from Sri Aurobindo's Savitri, and the context is that Satyavan and Savitri have got married, but Savitri knows, and nobody else knows. Nobody, at least in her new family, knows. Her husband doesn't know. His parents don't know that Satyavan was to live for only 1 more year. And because she knew this, at the same time, this is something she did not want to share with anybody. Uh, She was extremely passionate in her love for Satyavan and was counting days how long this bliss will last. All the same, she also started practicing her yoga so that she would acquire those abilities those powers which will enable her to bring Satyavan back from death. And that she succeeded in doing. Uh, Now, while she was for 1 year with Satyavan for 1 year, she was extremely passionate in her love. And these are a few lines out of many such passages where Sri Aurobindo has talked about the bliss of union, which is not only physical, but also at the spiritual level. A fusing of the joys of earth and heaven, a tremulous blaze of nuptial rapture past, a rushing of two spirits to be one, a burning of two bodies in one flame. Opened were gates of unforgettable bliss, two lives were locked within an earthly heaven, and fate and grief fled from that fiery hour. So it's a sort of a fusion of joys of earth and heaven. Joys of the earth and joys of heaven both rolled into one joy, and one can understand how much that joy would be if you add to the joys of earth also those of heaven. A tremulous blaze of nuptial rapture past, a rushing of two spirits to be one. So the union is both physical and at the level of the spirit, a burning of two bodies in one flame. So the bodies are two, but the consuming passion, the passion of love is one. Opened were gates of unforgettable bliss. Two lives were locked within an earthly heaven. Two lives, two bodies, but locked as if they were one. And fate and grief fled from that fiery hour. This hour could be the hour of the hour in the bed, or it could be uh, only a figurative sort of way of looking at that short period of 1 year during which they were supposed to be together. But while they were together, fate didn't bother them, although she knew what fate was like. Fate was cruel. She was going to be Satyavan for just 1 year in all. And grief, the bliss, overwhelmed all grief to such an extent that grief also fled from that fiery hour. And the anatomical pictures in this presentation were taken, as in the others, from Tortora and Grabowski's Principles of Anatomy and Physiology. Gratitude to the mother and Sri Aurobindo for making these sessions possible. And a big thank you to all the fathers of the world. Any questions?
Not yet. There are no questions in the chat box.
No questions in the chat and no questions. Now there is a question. How did Savitri bring him back to life? In Sri Aurobindo's Savitri, the traditional Savitri in Mahabharata, There, you know that she trapped the god of death by asking for a boon for children. And she said, if uh, my husband doesn't come back to life, how will I get those children? But in Sri Aurobindo Savitri, while the basic legend remains the same, it has been given an entirely different connotation. In Sri Aurobindo Savitri, uh, it is not because of the ordinary human passionate love for Satyavan that she wants Satyavan back. She wanted Satyavan back because Savitri's mission in the world was to usher in a new level of consciousness. And for that, she wanted some human material to work on. And Satyavan was the ideal material for that because to go to that next level in evolution from the highest mental to the supramental level, uh, she wanted somebody at that highest mental level of consciousness. So he symbolized that section of humanity which was poised for that next leap to the supramental, so that one could get a new world order based on love and oneness, which would change the very character of this earth, wipe out all sorrow and suffering from the earth. So that was the mission with which Savitri had come. And therefore, uh, she spends that 1 year in her own yoga uh, while she's married to Satyavan. And during that, she reaches the highest levels of realization. Uh, all that is also there in Savitri, how that happens. And then when the god of death starts taking Satyavan's soul away, she follows the god of death. And there's again a very long section in Savitri on the debate between the god of death and Savitri. And while Savitri is talking in futuristic terms, that the inevitability of death is something which has been so but does not necessarily have to be so. While earth has been a place of sorrow and suffering so far, it doesn't necessarily always has to be. It doesn't always have to be so necessarily. And uh, that our love for Satyavan is not of the ordinary type, and so on. The god of death keeps giving arguments which are based more on the type of consciousness an average person has now. And he says that, well, earth is earth and heaven is heaven. You cannot bring heaven down to earth. This is the way things are constituted in this world. Death is inevitable. And in fact, I only pity that people do not make good use of this life, even the use that they could make, and waste it without making any progress in consciousness. And all this that you are talking is an idle dream, and that can never happen. You can take something for yourself, you can ask for boons, but do not ask for Satyavan back. Do not try to disturb the order of nature that cannot change. So while I mean his view appears realistic, but it's also at the same time pessimistic, whereas she is full of optimism and hope that uh, it can happen. And she, just because today's there's an infant doesn't mean that it will never grow up. And so change for the better can happen, and let not our imagination limit the extent to which it can happen. And this argument goes on, and finally, the god of death presents many arguments why she should not go on insisting on getting Satyavan back. Uh, Finally, he reaches a dead end and tells her that you are asking for something very unusual. Show me the powers that you have to show me that you can actually do it. And then she reveals herself, that she is actually someone who has been sent by the divine on earth exactly for this purpose, to change the consciousness on earth. When he realizes that, the god of death vanishes. And then comes the final test for Savitri, when the divine itself starts giving some of the arguments similar to what the god of death had given. But then when she still stays firm and seems to remember why she was in the world for, the divine tells her that what you wish is what I also want, and you be my instrument to carry it out on earth. And with those blessings, she gets Satyavan back. So that is the way it happens in Sri Aurobindo Savitri, and both of them return to earth. Uh, Now, Satyavan dies sometime around noon, and by the time they return, it is late in the evening. So she started with Satyavan from home in the morning, and normally Satyavan returns home in the evening, much earlier than that day. This day, the return is rather late in the evening. Uh, and normally he went alone. Today he had gone with Savitri. Now, since I'm in this time and there are not many questions, let me digress a bit. Sri Aurobindo shows, a very realistic sort of his uh, knowledge of the ordinary world, the way most human beings live, also as much as the highest level at which they could live, what the potential ultimately is. He's familiar with both. And that's why you find that he has no difficulty in giving a very poetic expression to the conjugal bliss and the way Savitri and Satyavan uh, come feel that they are made for each other, they get married, and then the type of blissful life that they have, and the passionate love which both of them express for each other. All that he has expressed extremely well. In fact, Dr. Nadkarni who is one of the best interpreters of Savitri I've come across, used to say that these days, instead of the marital hymns in Sanskrit, we could easily select many passages from Savitri to be recited as a on the marriage ceremony. So he shows that realistic touch, and although he hardly had any sex life himself, although he did get married nominally, he was aware of all this because probably he knew uh, uh, sort of his knowledge was total, and therefore he didn't have to go through the experience himself to be able to know all this. But then coming back to the point where Savitri and Satyavan return after Savitri has brought Satyavan back from the jaws of death. The only thing is that they are returning much later in the evening that they normally did. So when they finally return, uh, what was the reaction of Savitri's parents? And they thought that normally Satyavan went alone. Today he has gone with Savitri, and that is why he is returning late. And Satyavan's father tells her something like this: "How could you do this to us? You know that in the absence of Satyavan, uh, even food doesn't taste right to us." Uh, so, they blame Savitri for holding him much longer in the forest than he normally does. And Satyavan also has forgotten his parents because he was enjoying Savitri's company so much that they are both returning late. But the blame goes not so much to Satyavan as to Savitri. She is blamed for doing this to them. Now, again, a very realistic sort of a touch of how the daughter in law is looked upon as someone who has taken their son away from them, and uh, so they return. And then comes the point that they return not only through the forest, but also with a large, they sort of around them, there are many sages and saints living in the forest. And then one of them asks Savitri about what she has learned. She probably knew that where she has been, and she may have something of great value to tell all of us. And what Savitri tells is something very brief, but that comes at the towards the almost the very end of Savitri. Uh, what Savitri says, what she has learned through all this passage uh, to through the to other worlds with the god of death and uh, Satyavan's soul, where she had been. What is it that she learned through this entire passage, where she had the interactions with the god of death and the divine and so on? All that she learned, she sums up in one brief line: to feel love and oneness is to live. That is, to live a meaningful life, one has to live a life full of love, inspired by a sense of oneness. That's all. A very profound sentence, but very simple, brief, but profound, and sums up the very purpose of life. To feel love and oneness is to live. So that's how Savitri brings Satyavan back.
Yes, Divya, you
Divya.
can just go ahead and ask, please.
No, I'd seen a question in the chat, so I thought probably you wanted to address that as it is continuation to Savitri's story. There was a question in the chat. Did Satyavan retain any memory of his death-like experience?
So did Satyavan have any memory of having been there?
Yeah, somebody asked that question. Yeah.
No, apparently not. Because the way it has been, as far as I remember in Sri Aurobindo Savitri, is that for some time he's completely disoriented and can't understand what had happened and how he is where he is. He appears quite disoriented. But then when he finds Savitri in front of him, he realizes that, well, not much has changed.
I had a question. We widely talk about menopause, but we don't talk about or hear a lot about andropause, right? Is that correct? Andropause. Can you briefly talk about it? And when does it usually happen? At what age in men?
In men, there is no clear cut menopause, but all the same, there is a decline in reproductive function. There's no sharp sort of clear cut division between sort of being capable of reproducing and not being capable of reproducing. That is not there because men as old as 80 have also reproduced. But at the same time, there is a decline in function. There is a fall in testosterone levels. And because there's a fall in testosterone levels, there's a rise in the FSH and LH levels. That is the uh, pituitary gonadotropins. Their levels go up. And because of the FSH being stimulated, the seminiferous tubules are stimulated and therefore they may grow in size. And therefore, the testicular size does not decrease, but this testis is not producing as much testosterone as it did in young age. But all the same, there's no sharp sort of point at which one can say that men enter menopause.
Okay. Another question: does celibacy play a role in the reproductive health or general health of a man?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Does celibacy
Mhm.
directly or indirectly affect the health of a man?
That's a good question because in spiritual practice, abstinence has been given great importance by many traditions.
Mhm.
Uh, and it's thought that the uh, energy that is used for reproduction, if it is conserved, then it could be put to good use. Uh, this probably has to be taken not just literally, but more in a symbolic sense. Because the fact is that uh, this all engrossing passion with which we are heavily overloaded for understandable reasons uh, does take a lot of energy and work on the part of both men and women. And therefore, although uh, this is often said more for men than for women that they should observe abstinence and the longer they can hold on to sort of not have any ejaculation, the more energy they will conserve. But that is because in men it is very obvious and visible as to whether it is happening or not. In women, it is not so obvious, but in a certain sense, it applies to both men and women that if this uh, energy and this attention and concentration which is given to sex could be put to better use, then certainly it will contribute to spiritual growth. So, to that extent, it is true. But then, having said that, it is also true that uh, most of us arrive in this world at a level of consciousness where, uh, to some extent, this needs the same type of treatment as other sensory pleasures, which means that other sensory pleasures, yes, they also don't give us lasting happiness. But at the same time, this knowledge that they will not give us lasting happiness comes through experience, which means, and that experience can come only from going through by indulging in those sensory pleasures. So, we indulge up to a point with the knowledge that it will not give lasting happiness. That in turn makes this knowledge real to us. When this knowledge becomes real to us because we have ourselves seen that it did not bring lasting happiness, then it translates it to the wisdom which can be used and put to higher use. Then life can be used for a higher purpose. To some extent, that applies also to the sex instinct. And without that experience, most people feel as if they remain dissatisfied, and the extra time and energy that they may have available because of this is not necessarily put to good use. Which means that for most of us, still that traditional division between brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas is a fairly reasonable sequence of events to follow. And what is more important is that to treat each phase as a preparation for the next phase. Brahmacharya prepares us for the grihasth, because it is during brahmacharya that the child learns that the four pillars of life are kama, artha, dharma, and moksha. So desires are legitimate, including sex desire, and of course the desire for good food, a good life from the worldly point of view, uh, power, position, prestige, wealth, all that is, all those desires are legitimate. Artha is also legitimate, that is to accumulate the means to satisfy those desires. That's also legitimate. So earn money by all, no, that's not a sin. But then the third pillar, dharma, is also important, that is a sense of right and wrong. So satisfy those desires and accumulate the means to satisfy those desires, not forgetting considerations of right and wrong. And he has been told what those considerations of right and wrong are through the Shastra during Brahmacharya. And then why is that necessary? Because the ultimate aim of life is not to satisfy the desires, but the ultimate aim is moksha, that is liberation, which will make us independent of our dependence on these worldly fulfillment of worldly desires. So that actually is true freedom. It's liberation from our dependence for our happiness on fulfillment of worldly desires. So only after some worldly desires have been fulfilled, all of them don't have to be fulfilled because they can be endless. So we don't have to wait till all worldly desires have been fulfilled. But after some worldly desires have been fulfilled, this knowledge that they will not give lasting happiness, and therefore I have to depend upon something which itself is everlasting. How can something which is short lasting be a source of everlasting happiness? So, what is everlasting is the divine. So, once I attach myself to that, then I will not be dependent on short lasting things. So, therefore, sense of right and wrong is important, because that is what will enable me to get liberated from the bondage of ordinary desires and my dependence on the fulfillment of ordinary desires for my happiness. So, all this he has learnt in Brahmacharya. Then, comes grihasth. So he can apply this knowledge and use grihasth itself as a vehicle for spiritual growth, because in grihasth, he gets an opportunity to shower his love and affection on the family, particularly children. And that comes so naturally and easily that it becomes good and easy training for the next phase, that is vanaprasth. During vanaprasth, when the children may not need his attention anymore, he can use this expertise acquired during grihasth, that is the expertise in loving and expressing that love through giving. He can use this expertise on those who are not biologically related to him. He can spread his love out more thinly during vanaprastha. And then comes the next stage, sannyas, which means that this sense of detachment, being able to love without any attachment to those who are biologically related and to those who are biologically not related, all that love can be expressed entirely without any attachment. So that is what essentially sannyas is about. Sannyas doesn't necessarily mean one has to go away to a forest. Sannyas means total detachment, for which the transition, vanaprastha is a sort of a transition. At least one is moving away from attachment to the immediate family to attachment to people in general, to anyone who happens to be around us. So, and that sort of is the rough sequence that suits most of us. And therefore, skipping the stage of grihasth is not necessarily a solution or a shortcut to spiritual progress. But then, with this knowledge, that will remain in moderation, and it will remain in not only in ways which are legally and morally valid, because spiritual considerations are of a higher order than legal and moral considerations, ordinary ethical considerations. And therefore, it will ascend to a higher level. For example, in the ordinary world, lust for a wife is considered ethical and normal, legally valid, morally valid. But spiritually speaking, any type of lust is not appropriate, even lust for the wife. So it is of a higher order, which means that love without the without catering to the demands of the lower vital. That is what uh, love for anybody, including the love for the wife, is meant to be.
Thank you so much. You beautifully explained science and the spiritual aspect. Thank you so much.
All right, I think this can be a good time for closing with all the wisdom which you have shared. So we can just have few moments of silence and end today's class. Thank you, everyone.